Hello,
Hello.
everyone. Hello. Thank you for joining us today. And we are about to start the very last day of Inspire Workshop. So, for live captions and translations, please scan the QR code on your screen somewhere right there on the top. And if you have any questions, please also send through the Q&A QR code or the link that we're going to pop up on the chat very soon. So during the workshops, we're also going to run two live challenges for an exclusive accessory. So don't forget to enter the pool in the chat and also in the QR code. As a reminder, rewards will be distributed only after Inspire is over, so around August. Now I'll hand it off to ByJovian and Rocks and Roll to talk about level design and environmental art, a unique combination. Hello, guys. And yeah,
Hello. All right. Hello. I'm Roxy or Rox and Roll, and I'm with Jove or ByJovian. We'll be talking about level design and visual design, a unique combination. First, we'll be going over introductions, and then, as I've said before, I'm Roxy. I'll be going over the importance of both level design and environment art in tandem. My steps will be a brief introduction to level design, followed by steps to a healthy design process, our first live challenge, environmental art in tandem, designing with respect to other fields, and finally ending it off with pitfalls to consider.
And for my part, I will be covering the basics of visual art in games and going more into detail about environmental art and character design in relation to it. I will also feature a live demo as well as real brainstorming examples that we went through when establishing environment and character designs in our game Lightwork. So let us quickly introduce ourselves. My name is ByJovian. You can also call me Jove or Jisoo. I am a freelance illustrator of 7 years, and I'm also a design student. You might have seen my art in various different games, but the main games you probably have seen my art in is In Plain Sight 2, Lab Experiment, Coal, Flan Salon, and so on. I also participated in a few game jams such as Cast Cafe and Lightwork.
Hello, I'm Roxanne or Roxy. I am a 3D artist for 6 years. I am also the co-lead at Blacklight. We make In Plain Sight, the series, among some other small projects. I have also worked on Stars Align, Fighting, and Tower World. I've also been a part of Roblox's official jams a few times, where we worked on Cat's Cafe, Lightwork, and On Air. Now we'll be going on to my portion. Um, as stated in the agenda, my talk is the importance of both level design and environment art in tandem. Firstly, I would like to introduce level design and environment art as respective fields alongside good practices for both. Level design is the entire way in which players interact with games alongside experiences of the game's mechanics and what it has to offer. To this regard, level design is the crux of what can really make or break a game, regardless of if a game's design is incredible. If the level design does not supplement it, the overall game will not be enjoyable. A major factor in this is making sure the player has a good time interacting with both the environments and the mechanics without feeling like they're doing it wrong. Level design is one of the earliest processes, yet it will be chronically and frequently iterated on as the game development process evolves. This can be for a multitude of reasons, but the most important detail is that nothing is final. Not only is revision a required part of the process, oftentimes it will result in a much better experience overall. Design varies heavily on how a game is designed and played. There is no one size fits all style when it comes to creating a level. Of course, a level is a varying term that entirely hinges on what that game may be. For instance, a linear story game, a level could be how an environment or a player interacts through an environment with an intended direction of exploration and important set piece areas. However, for something like a fighting game, a level could be defined as a stage for players to interact with each other in. Under this definition, design as a whole varies entirely based off what the intended play of the game is. When level designing, you should always have a grasp and ideally an inherent understanding of the intended vision alongside what makes the game enjoyable. Level design accounts heavily for the implicit and explicit ways in which a player is pushed and challenged through a level.
Hey, so Roxy, I know what the words implicit and explicit are, but how do you portray that in a game?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Implicit design is how a player is naturally hinted and prodded in directions, such as having areas that naturally flow into others, or puzzles that open into the next area. For example, looking at the RV park level in Lightwork, the top left image, it is designed to prod the player in the intended direction without explicit indication as to what that direction is. We use softer angles alongside guiding rails to make sure this works. Alongside this, the camera, being a fixed isometric camera, helps to show that there's more up to the top right, naturally prodding the player in that direction. However, the color block level, if you look to the bottom left, that puzzle might be interesting mechanically, the way it interacts with the player and the game. However, it also is unintuitive and vague, resulting in such a confusing and overly complicated level that cannot guide the player towards its puzzle elements. Moving along to more explicit indication, this is more direct, as direct indication to what progress entails. This is guiding arrows, lighting on objects of interest, or intentional blockage or resistance from the level itself. Looking at the example, while it's an older work, this is a small example of explicit design. It's a showcase game where everything is meant to stand out. However, there's also just nothing really gameplay designed by this point, but I needed the players to know which direction entailed progress. In this way, the top image is what the top image is what happened in the final game. There's usage of explicit arrows alongside particles, and usage of lighting for what would normally be a dim lit area is now made an area of interest by the explicit lighting of this area and the explicit darkening of another area, prodding the player in this direction naturally. Now moving along to steps to a healthy design process. Level design typically begins once the first prototypes of a playable character exists. This is because depending on the game, oftentimes without knowledge and feel for the character or mechanics surrounding it, designers would practically be playing a guessing game on how the game controls. An understanding of both intended design alongside working prototypes of the game are almost entirely necessary before the design can exist within a 3D space. If levels are designed before the player's in-game play is functional, you should expect minor to complete revisions. Now moving along to the blockout process. I would say to focus on designing with primitive parts. As mentioned, with revisions being inevitable and ideally encouraged, building with basic parts allows for incredibly easy iteration and revision on design. This whole process is called a gray box or a blockout. Alongside this, a good practice to use, especially within a team setting, is utilizing standardized and agreed upon increments when designing. This allows for modularity in design without fear of elements not properly connecting or being editable. This also allows design to iterate quicker since there isn't a fear of making sure frequently used blockout elements align to other objects or the player character. While this segment is mostly focused on tips for level design with the understanding of a core basis, if you would like a crash course on the fundamentals, I would recommend Zone Buddy's talk, Building for Rapid Prototyping. Now on to what I believe is the most important principle in the design process, that being finding the fun. Every step of the way, level design needs to be iterated on that both lead in a way that both leads the player onwards while naturally establishing and expanding mechanics. Characters, and by extension the player, should feel like they have a keen understanding of their environment, even if the intent from an environmental angle is to feel unfamiliar. This comes from a confidence in navigation due to an understanding of the player's core controls, alongside how these controls interact with the environment and the level. The establishing and building on mechanics is integral to an enjoyable experience, even if linear. Every game has mechanics both big and small. A mechanic is genuinely just any means of how a player can uniquely interact with the game, oftentimes in ways that are intended to supplement the level design. For instance, think of a platformer game with a roll button. The game would ideally tutorialize this mechanic in ways that are diegetic and immediately understandable to the player. While that part might be easy, what's important that the mechanic cannot be forgotten by the designers, because in doing so, it would be forgotten by the players. It needs to be utilized and ideally woven into design in ways that feel natural and expand on the mechanic's core function. The process extends to all mechanics, big and small. It's also important for designer to understand the limits of these mechanics. Testing design chronically is important to know if ideas are too much challenge or alternatively too little. Factoring that alongside contextual understanding and a trust in players' knowledge of the character and how they control is one of the most hard and important aspects to learn and iterate on.
Hey, so Roxy, I have a question. So let's say I have a unique level design concept. How can I properly introduce these new elements to a player who has likely never seen this concept before?
I'm glad you asked. Well, Jove, you could do this by introducing and expanding on your character and mechanics. Levels oftentimes feature mechanics or gimmicks designed to push for unique interaction with the player. Mechanics should be designed to slowly ramp up intensity and frequency in which you interact with them. Levels that are designed to introduce these mechanics should act as a little playground depending on the circumstance of what a level entails. For instance, a fighting game, this may mean having the player interact with the mechanic from their spawn or a safe area away from enemies, while for a platformer, it may entail making the hazard non lethal. However, designing with the ability to trust the player is one of the most important principles on this list. Trust in the player is a result of safe introduction of mechanics, as mentioned. However, there comes a time when you need to expand on these ideas and further utilize a mechanic in ways that are both fun and engaging to the player. There is a time where you be- This is the time where you begin twisting the mechanic. Maybe it interacts with other or new mechanics or gets new properties established to it, allowing for more unique level designs centric on these new ideas. However, after expanding, though, you now have to test you now have the ability to test a player's knowledge and challenge them. This comes from through tests of skill and understanding of how the player interacts with the mechanics you have established prior. However, challenge should not introduce new properties or rules, and instead should purely test what has been established earlier. One of the hardest things to master is knowing a player's familiarity with the game and knowing how much to trust their abilities. Many games feature moments where the level may have too much challenge or, on the contrary, too little. This happens due to designers not properly gauging how difficult a level may be in comparison to how familiar a player is with the game. Continuing on this, once a level is greenlit, do keep in mind that being greenlit is a blanket term for a level being deemed good to go. This should be done after careful testing and consideration. However, even after being greenlit, do beware of complex detailing. This is because despite approval, a level is never truly finished. Due to the complicated nature of the game design process, it's always plausible details can change entirely, such as the changing of the player controls or introduction or removal of mechanics. Looking back to the whole platformer character having a roll button example, an entire level could be designed perfectly with this mechanic in mind and be greenlit for future detailing and development, but design iteration may result in the removal of this roll button. The removal of this will result in the level being unplayable. But however, even if you remove all roll areas, it may be likely that due to the removal of these segments, the level may become unfun due to a lack of mechanical interaction between the player and the game. This is why iteration past initial greenlighting should be anticipated and planned around, especially early into the game design process. Now, I would like to give a small little recap through our live challenge. Which factor is best to account for earliest in the design pipeline? Would it be environment art, gameplay polishing, character controls, or gameplay mechanics? All right. While all of these could technically apply, On average, you should wait for 3, the character controls, before beginning to prototype and create level design. While it's important to account for environment art when creating a level, the art process will typically happen simultaneously, if not a little sooner than level design. On top of this, gameplay mechanics are also critical. However, this is more dependent on the game, and on average, is typically designed after the character controller. Now, I'd like to pivot to environmental art in tandem. This process typically begins at the same exact time as level design. This means that both level design and environmental art begin around the early concepting phase, usually after the initial design documents and gameplay are conceived. Environmental artists focus on the detail environment of the environments created by level designers. Typically, environment artists are also in charge of how a game world looks and feels from both a style and feel perspective. Artists both create the theme of these levels alongside ensure that level designers fit the vision of said theme. Before levels are greenlit, style tests are encouraged to give yourself and other members a feel for what they're working on.
Hey, Roxy, but what is a style test?
Thank you for asking. A style test is a pure detail and style mockup of what you anticipate an environment to look like. Think of it as 3D concept art, with examples on the right. This is a great step, especially if gameplay prototyping and level design is an intensive process, as environment artists cannot detail levels that haven't been passed through to them, so an intermediary step to refine style and overall vision is always helpful. And while level design shouldn't overly rely on adhering to setting, if it compromises fun, designers should still keep in mind the general style and feel of these concepts. Continuing on this, style, like level design, should expect revisions and iterations as the game development process moves along. Expect drastic theme changes. This is sorry. This is because once blockouts are handed to artists, detailing begin in a process known as an art pass. Art passes typically involve direct detailing and design over top the basic geometry shown in the level design portion of the talk. While basic geometry is intentionally simple for gameplay purposes, be wary of adding or removing level geometry until you are confident it would be okay to do so. A common mistake is the accidental compromising of the level design. Before you begin an art pass, be ready to play the level and ask questions in regards to the intended vision to fully ensure that you don't accidentally override the intended gameplay. I read my notes out of order. So sorry about that. Would you mind going to the next one? Now I'd like to move on to designing with respect to other fields. While both of these fields are individually important, how they interact can entirely shape a game's feel. Both level design and environment art focus on making the character/the player feel like they implicitly belong in the setting, but level designers focus on this from a gameplay perspective of ensuring the game is both fun and engaging with healthy interactions of mechanics, while environment artists ensure that the levels meet a stylistic and thematic vision of the game and its universe. Both are incredibly important in their own merits, and little care for either can result in a lackluster overall game. Little care for environment art can result in a fun yet average experience, while little care for the level design can result in a pretty yet uninteresting game. Both can exist on the platform and do just fine. There are many instances of both of these working wonderfully, but they ultimately remain relatively vanilla. Stable care for both fields can result in a truly unique game. Now, I would finally like to talk about pitfalls to consider. This is when both teams interact, there will inevitably be issues that you have to work through. For instance, level designers should keep in close contact with environment artists to ensure thematic vision is met. If these two never communicate, level designers will have no clue what to be basing their level around, which will result in an area having nothing showing the intended thematic vision. Environment artists should ideally keep in close contact as well, primarily because the art pass can result in unintended changes to level design, such as the addition or removal of level geometry that may interfere with the flow of a level. Art passes can also result in the unintentional editing of internal tools, such as gameplay mechanics that interact with the player. For example, think of damage parts or checkpoints in a platformer. If either are moved without understanding that they are there for specific reasons, level design will suffer as a result. It's also important that the level designers are able to communicate the intended vision to the art team to ensure gameplay visions are met and kept during and after the art pass. Lastly, both environmental artists and level designers should familiarize themselves with internal tooling. All of these are just common examples of design pitfalls that result in either a vision being stepped on, resulting in a game that could feel less than stellar. However, careful consideration for both fields, alongside healthy communication and understanding of this process, can result in a game being truly one of a kind. In conclusion, I would like to say thank you for listening to my portion of the talk on level design and environment art. Sorry, I admittedly missed a slide because I script my notes too fast, but now I'll be passing it on to Jove to talk about more on how you can take visual design to the next level. We'll be saving our Q&A for the end of both talks, so if you have questions for my half of the talk, please save them for the end and take it away, Jove.
Well, thank you, Roxy. So let's move on to my portion of the workshop, which is building immersive worlds with environment and character design. To quickly recap my agenda, I will be covering the basics of visual art in games and going more into detail about environmental art and character design in relation to it. I will also feature a live challenge, a live demo, as well as including brainstorming examples we went through when establishing environment and character designs in our game Lightwork. So let's go over what visual design is. Visual design is an all-encompassing term for any visual or aesthetic elements in a game. This basically includes everything a player will see beyond simple gameplay. So UI, UX, environmental design, character design, prop design, and even world building to an extent. Good visual design complements the level design and can make your game have a completely unique look and feel from other games. While there are multiple disciplines within visual design, I would like to focus on two main disciplines today, which are environmental art and character design. When it comes to these two disciplines, new developers or solo developers tend to feel very frightened. After all, visual design tends to have their own specialized people in larger teams, and environment and character design are one of the most scrutinized by players. However, with a few basic concepts, new or solo developers can start finding these disciplines much more approachable. So what is environmental art? Environmental design/art is the process of building a game's visual, atmosphere, and spatial elements. Effective environmental art shapes the player's perception of the game's look and feel. And like Roxy mentioned earlier, it is very important for environmental art to work alongside level design, as they shape and form each other as they are developed. If environmental art and level design is not properly handled together, it can create a disconnect between the game's themes. Within Roblox, environmental art can commonly be established through lighting, building, camera, animation, styles, and even sound. At the bottom is an example of a gray box which represents a level, and the same gray box with added environmental art. You can notice how adding the environmental art instantly establishes a unique atmosphere. It might be a little daunting to come up with environmental settings, but it can really be easy as finding a reference you like online or even outside, or basing it off from your existing level design gameplay concept. There are truly no bad ideas when it comes to developing anything, and this holds especially true within visual design. Below are some examples of how reference can be transformed into a full environmental art setting, and that even includes this little cat meme that was used as an inspiration for the building on the right. And if you have an idea, but if you're unsure if it would look good, a way to check before committing to it is to create a draft. Like Roxy mentioned before, a lot of builders tend to make a gray box or do a style test before committing to their build to save time. The same can go for basically any visual concept, especially in environmental art, where you can make a rough draft.
What kind of drafts could you do?
Well, thank you for asking. Basically, any type of draft, as long as it creates a readable concept. So it can be 2D, 3D, or any other type of media, as long as it's readable. While my examples here are done digitally, you can even make your environmental concepts with traditional tools, such as pencil crayons or markers, literally on paper. And you might even discover an entirely new concept using those unconventional methods.
That's amazing, but is there anything I should keep in mind?
Kinda. Environmental art will inherently affect the type of demographics that play your game. Vibrant, colorful, and cartoony environmental art brings in younger audiences, while serious and realistic environment art brings in older audiences. Below are some examples, but you can also use these expectations to create a purposely misleading environment that can benefit a unique idea. Think about those horror games that have a very friendly and child-friendly exterior, but they end up turning into horror. So that's kind of like a very unique gap concept. In addition, you should note that detailed environmental art generally requires more resources on the player side. And since Roblox is supported on all kinds of devices, players with lower device specs will face issues when playing a game with detailed environments. Now let's move on to character design. Character design is the process of designing a character's visual appearance to convey personality, world building, and role. Character design encompasses both the players and non-playable characters. Good character design adds to immersion and can tie the environmental design with rest of the world building. So let's get into the basics of character designing. The three main concepts I will cover are silhouettes and shapes, characteristics, and color palette. These concepts are not unique to video game development, and if you have interest in other media projects that involve characters, these are very good tips to keep in mind. It's also to be noted that these concepts are principles, and there are many character designs that break these principles and are still effective. However, I do feel that it's very important to learn what these principles are before you learn how to break them. So getting into the first principle is silhouette and shapes. Silhouette, like the term implies, is how a character looks only through their major shapes, ignoring all details and colors. Silhouettes and shapes is the main aspect of a character that differentiates itself from other characters and what makes a character instantly recognizable if done well. For example, let's take a look at these silhouettes of popular Roblox characters on the left. Can you recognize them? That's right, it's the famous Despacito spider and the skeleton body pack. You can also design effective silhouettes and even establish some personality by also considering shape language. Here is an example on the right. Most people would consider the rounder shape a lot more friendlier than the spiky one, and you can basically use that to establish how you want your character to feel from the exterior. Now, I want you to think for a moment and consider why this principle may not be too prominent in most Roblox games characters. I will come back to that point later on, so just keep it in mind. Next, let's move on to distinctive characteristics. Characteristics are basically the next step of character design once you establish a silhouette. Shape language can be continued to be used here, although it may hold less of an impact. Characteristics are where you can define a character's role, identity, world-building themes, backstory, and more. They basically aim to make a character unique, although in a more subtle way than silhouettes do. Below is an example of how one silhouette can be used to make a character have very different settings. This basic cat with a basic dress can look like the cat has very different occupations depending on the characteristics. However, if you were to use all of these cats in one game, players might find it difficult to identify each one at first, which is why silhouettes remain important. On the right of these characters, on the right is how these characteristics can be added to different silhouettes to further push a distinct character. With these characters, you can almost guess what their jobs or what their hobbies might be. So moving on is the color palette. Through utilizing color theory, you can make a character blend in with their environment or make them pop out from their environment. You can also establish character hierarchy, where less important characters can blend in through having colors that are similar colors of the environment, while more important characters can pop out through having contrasting colors from the environment. Here is a design example on the bottom to demonstrate. You might notice that the green frog blends in more with the environment and the red frog kind of stands out. And while both of them look like they belong in the environment, the red frog might be a more important character from a distance. There are no bad or ugly colors when it comes to designing characters, but if you want to keep basic color theory in mind, you do want to keep basic color theory in mind if you want your characters to work with the environment. And I will actually show an example of that in my demo later. So speaking of demo, let's get into the demo where we design characters based on an existing setting. Now for
Hi, Jove. I would like a character based off of my setting, please. Jove, I think your microphone is muted. No, we're not hearing you.
How's that? How's it now?
It's your other mic.
Oh, it's the other mic?
Yeah.
You guys can still hear me though, right?
Yeah, it's just a lot more bit crutched, but go for it.
All right. Well, we have to work with what we have. So
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes someone else in your team might already have an idea, or you might be working with a client who has a vision. If you're stuck on brainstorming your concept, working with someone else can ease your mind. So let's see what Roxy has.
Hello, I was looking to work out a character design for the main character of my showcase game. Narratively, they're a meek shut-in with a lot of history with winter sports and whatnot. I really want to make sure they stand out from the surroundings, but are ultimately pretty down to earth.
Yeah, okay. So now that we have a base setting, let's interpret this. For ease of access, I already copied and pasted what Roxy sent here. And the program that I'm using right now is Clip Studio Paint. However, you are free to use any software or tools that you have available for you. So let's take a look at what Roxy has. So one of the first few things that kind of point out to me when I see this is Roxy wants this to be a main character and they want them to stand out from their surroundings. So my first idea right now is we have to think about color. And I kind of have like a set of color that I already prepared. And these colors are all very nice colors. However, if you were to add in the fact that the colors of the environment, you would notice the colors on the right is a lot more suitable than the colors on the left. That is exactly what I mean when it comes to how color theory still matters even if there are no bad colors. So now that we have the colors, let's look at how we might establish the silhouette. So we have the characteristics that they are a meek shut-in, and yeah, so that kind of makes me think that this character would have a rather round silhouette. So I'm gonna draw a lot of like round shapes. And because they're meek, I kind of feel like they would be a lot more like composed. Yeah, there we go. That kind of looks like a nice silhouette. Now that we have the silhouette, let's move on to characteristics. So we know that they have a lot of history with winter sports. And that makes me think that this character would have a lot of scarves for some reason. A lot of scarves, a lot of hats, maybe like even a winter coat. So let's kind of add that in. And because I feel like they are a shut-in, they're also like kind of like shy. So my concept right now is maybe they will have a lot of scarves that cover their most of their face. So let's have that going. A lot of scarves. And let's add some winter puffer. They have their hands in their pockets, by the way, because they're kind of like reserved, you know? Let's give them a hat with a pom-pom maybe. The reason why I'm using warmer colors for the clothing is because I feel like even if we're using contrasting colors, the environment is like way too warm and the entire character was very blue. I don't feel like they would fit in with the environment that they are supposed to fit in. So that's kind of my thought process here. But I will make like the legs blue, the pants blue, because I think separating your proportions by color is also a good way to like make your character kind of like distinct. So let's continue with designing this character. And like since they're a shut-in, maybe like they sleep in a lot. Maybe they'll have like half closed eyes, like something like that. And yeah, that kind of looks like a pretty good character. Normally, once you have a character design like that, you want to like polish it a bit more before you hand it off back to your teammate or your client or Roxy in this case. Um, However, that kind of basically summarizes how you might go about designing a character from scratch. Even if it was quite brief, I hope it gives you some insights, and I really encourage everyone to design your own character with Roxy's ideas. I would love to see how other people would interpret the same setting. Okay. Now, coming back to how I mentioned the fact that the silhouette as a design principle is often not visible in a lot of Roblox characters, despite it being the grounding aspect of a lot of character designs I showed in the demo. Many Roblox games, when creating humanoid character designs, tend to base it off from the default Bloxy Roblox rig. The rig, while serving as an excellent base, remains consistent in silhouette and shape. While developers try to add accessories to make these characters different, it often fails to change the silhouette. Since Roblox provides these rigs by default and it is often the rig everyone on Roblox is naturally familiar with, it is often a problem you can observe more in Roblox games than games made in other game engines. Below are some examples of how these characters who have very different color schemes um, end up looking pretty much the same if we only look at the silhouette. So why do developers use the same base for humanoid characters? Developers try to make custom rigs for non-humanoid characters such as monsters or animals. So what is stopping them from utilizing custom humanoid rigs? There are multiple factors, but the main factors are the following. Humanoid characters are often higher maintenance, and people tend to therefore have a higher expectation on humanoid characters, especially since we are human ourselves, and we can figure out discrepancies a lot faster, especially if we are playing as one. In addition, the existing avatar decoration feature allows players to spend their time decorating their avatar. However, if a game has custom characters for the player, this can make players very unhappy since they are unable to play as their own character identity they spend time and money on. In addition, custom characters rarely stop at just models. They require animations, rigging, and can even change level design entirely if it's on the player. With those factors, humanoid characters generally tend to be extremely costly at a larger scale, which is why a lot of developers prefer using a base, and that is pretty valid. However, if you have the resources, custom characters provide benefits that are difficult to substitute with other visual design elements. Characters that are custom tailored to the environment are basically guaranteed to fit in, meaning players will be met with a highly immersive experience. In addition, custom characters separate the game from their typical Roblox aesthetic, allowing your game to have a completely unique look and feel like no other. And finally, since you're not bound by a base, the freedom is practically endless. Ultimately, it is up to you or your team to decide which values you consider. What I found very neat about Roblox is that it has a very unique ecosystem from other game engines. And that's kind of why it's so interesting to design around the ecosystem or on top of them, especially if you're challenging something that's basically engraved into most players' expectations, such as characters. Now let's move on to my live challenge. So despite the benefits that a custom character brings to a game, why might a lot of Roblox developers find hesitation to implementing them in their games? 1. Custom characters can have high production costs. 2. Custom characters may conflict with their audience's values for their game. 3. Custom characters often require other forms of access beyond the model itself. And 4. All of the above. So scan the QR code right there. right, so the answer is all of the above. These are all very valid reasons why Roblox developers may use non-custom characters in their game. Finally, I would like to show some examples of how these processes were done for our game Lightwork. Starting off with environmental art, we actually first based it off from our interpretation of the game jam prompt, which was one tool, many uses. After brainstorming possible interpretations, we landed on light as a tool. Then we thought of what type of environment would complement that concept and eventually landed on a high value contrast with cold and warm theming. It made sense to have a cold environment, both color and actual temperature environment theme wise, that contrasted with like the warm flame. We then made some rough drafts of the environment, including the colors, the lighting, and some building elements before committing to the concept. Next is the character design. Going back on the idea of light as a tool, we started expanding our concept on how light as a tool can be incorporated, which was how we ended up in the idea that the light should be a part of the character. Since we wanted the tool to have a lot of emphasis, we made the character have similar colors to the environment except for the light, which was contrasted by a bright orange. We also put more detail on the tool, making the viewer's eyes be drawn to it naturally due to the difference in the shapes. So the top has a lot more complicated shapes while the bottom half tends to stay simple. That's kind of another way how you can draw attention to a certain part using silhouettes. We also took some inspiration from a game named Beacon Pines for the proportions since it was very cute and we wanted something cute. Then we drafted a few different ideas before finding a one we liked and then committing to it. So that's how it looks like right there. And that basically summarizes our presentation. I hope this brought some insights on how you might design for your next project. And I thank you for staying along until now. Now we can move on to the Q&A.
Hello. Back.
Okay. Okay, I'm back. Hello. Wow, that was amazing.
Hello.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Josie and Roxy. Very well explained. And yeah, we're super excited to move for our Q&A now. So please send all questions you might have through the QR code that is showing here on the screen and also pin in the chat. And I will start with the first question. We have Phil here, so we'll need to filter. But first, from Super Matias 2012, what visual asset thing makes a game look so polished and well done, like it took years to do?
Um, in that regard, it really depends on the game you're going for, but is typically something that happens a lot is that when you're doing a lot of more visual design, if you work with just Roblox and space parts, it becomes really limiting after a while. If you want something that you can use to help just make things stand out immediately, learning rudimentary Blender knowledge or even just using mesh kits, if you don't have any from the toolbox, where are really good ways of just making something stand out visually. If Joe, you want to answer that as well.
Yeah, on the same note, you can also make custom textures through 2D illustration softwares. And you can basically make like other types of custom assets. This basically includes UI and so on. Yes.
I'm back. Can you hear me? Sorry,
Yes, we can.
Yep, you're good.
I lost my connection. Okay,
Oh
so
no, it's all right.
can I move for the second question?
Yep.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so from Utiba Core, when
Hi,
it comes
Utiba.
to level design, what do you feel like is the most important part when it comes to designing a level or something similar to that?
I really like to focus on just well, after knowing what the game is, I like to try and make it look like even with primitives, it doesn't feel like there are primitives, if that makes sense. Focusing on dynamic elevation, making the player not go around flat terrain over and over. Really trying to make sure every angle feels like it is intentional within the design is what really is one of the big things that I focus on. That, and of course, making sure that your design first and foremost interacts with your intended mechanics, that being the player controls, or oftentimes for stuff like a platformer, usually, or even just really any game that is player a lot of gameplay, something like a fighting game or even just platform or whatnot. Usually, if it's linear leveling system, like go from A to B, usually what you can do is design and pre-plan your mechanics first and make sure they're woven in as the level progresses. And that's something that's also incredibly important.
Great. Yeah, great answer. Next, with Wasted. Should we feed in play testers into our process to see if our Mac works, or is the developer's side enough?
In that regard, you need playtesters for something that, like, both. Sorry, let me reword this. Both playtesting and developing, like internal and external playtesting, is incredibly important for all phases because internal playtesting just for developers, everyone on the team already has a rough understanding of the game, and oftentimes if you're already a designer, you know what the play is supposed to be like how you were supposed to traverse through a level. However, playtesters obviously like get a range of people who know the game pretty well, like are hardcore in your design, like they're there because they like the game, and also try to find outsiders if possible, because that's how you get a really good spectrum of knowledge with the game. Like some people who know the base controls already and see how they interact with a new area, versus people who don't even know the controls playing a new area. And that's a way you can really understand all like every like different pair of eyes that comes on your game and what to take notes from. But I will say one of the most important things is to do it early. You don't want playtesters to play the end product because then there's no point in playtesting. You're not changing it.
Yeah, makes sense. Next from MindBot. Is it possible to create different maps will also follow different art styles? Example, classic map coexisting with map which follow a much more stylized look.
Yeah, of course. Do you think you have something you want to say on this one, or?
Uh, yeah. Can I just quickly have the question pasted so I can kind of review it, if that's fine?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is very possible that there's a lot of different concepts that kind of play on different art styles. And if you have a concept that fits these various different maps that each have an individual different art style, then I think it can be like a fantastic idea. It can work fantastically. Let me look at the. Yeah, no, I agree. So even if it's like in like the same map, like even if it has like two different art styles, as long as stylistically they don't clash and they can harmonize with each other, you can basically practically have as many art style as you want.
In that regard, just expanding on that from a design angle, if you look to games like Super Mario Odyssey, each kingdom in that game represents a completely different art style. You can directly compare one to another and see completely different changes in both themes, art, and visual like modeling quality, alongside how each level is designed with wholly different mechanics and progression in mind. And the good thing, the way this works, is because despite complete different theme, they still work under one game blanket because they all follow the same core game design. It's still a collectathon platformer where you keep the same base controls, you keep the same base collectibles, yada yada, and essentially that helps it flow into one full game while having completely different styles per level.
Awesome. Next from Royal Caribbean 2020. What is your workflow for modular asset creation? How many unique props do you usually create before reusing them across the level?
It's pretty case by case, admittedly. For instance, the game I work on in Plain Sight, a lot of the maps are designed around completely unique items just throughout the map, incredibly dense, like as if it was a real place. So we don't do a ton of asset reusage, but we sort of follow the idea for modularity of if it's not a super unique or specific object, it is okay to reuse it. Something like, imagine nobody's going to want to make 15 variants of a chair because you already made one. And so, in that regard, for like each game is different. Of course, I can say that with my game design of usually each object needs variety, but doesn't also need variety in its repetitive objects. Same could apply to other things. For instance, like my work on Stars Align, a lot of like the general world theme was made, and then we would make an area. And usually, once we had those base assets, a lot of those assets could be reused in other areas. For instance, a lot of nature and whatnot. Because ideally, you shouldn't be making those assets over and over and over.
Amazing. Next one, specifically for Jovi, from That Crazy Do You Know? When making your games, how do you find the right environment or design? How do you make people feel with the surroundings in game? And what is your favorite method?
Well, that's a great question. So I think in many cases, it also kind of depends on how the workflow is going. So for example, if I have a concept for a game first, for example, I want to make a game with like where you run a pizza shop, I would kind of see what type of aesthetics are correlated with a pizza shop, and also think about any other unique gimmicks that I might be able to turn into an environment. So for example, we have like pizza shop, for example, and then we also kind of like think of like steampunk themes. We can kind of like mush those together and create a very unique environment and design. And in terms of how I would make people feel with their surroundings in game, I think a lot of it is just making sure that the entire environment is tied together and it kind of feels like an actual space rather than um, a bunch of different like models just in Roblox. So this would include a lot of lighting work, sound work, as well as camera work. It just depends on how well you tie all those elements together and how truly immersive you can make it for the player who's playing it.
Awesome, thank you. And last question from Cheese12 had 12. What have been some of your favorite characters you've designed or worked on?
You want to go first?
Roxy, do you want to go first? Because that's a loaded question for me.
Yeah, no, it is for me too, admittedly. On air, Game Jam is some of my favorite designs. I did the newscasters concept art, so I made Anchor, Doppler, and Tipley. I'm a big fan of those three. Um, from games that are like more notable, I came up with the gameplay design for Shockwire, the camera in Plain Sight 2. Trying to think of any other favorites, but those are the immediate ones.
I actually wanted to quickly show my exact favorite character designs I worked on. Right here, you see this example. So this was a character sheet that I made for our game Cast Cafe. And I think there are like multiple different categories. And one of the categories for that game jam was kind of like having an international experience. So considering there's going to be many different characters within the game, I also kind of want to think of how I can represent different international themes with these characters. So it was very fun working with different nationalities in mind and incorporating them to like almost like an animal character design. And it was interesting trying to figure out something that is like normally human and turning it into more animal characteristics almost. Although I will say it is very important to also like not sorry. It is very important to like keep your designs respectful if you are working with international themes. Yeah, so that was a very fun challenge for me, and I am very proud of these designs. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for sharing. And with that, I want to wrap up this amazing workshop. Thank you, Jovi and Roxy. And thank you, everyone, for attending Inspire 2026. We are wrapping up now, but we have a workshop coming up very soon. So stay tuned for designing unique games and fun core loops by Gabino happening at 2 p.m. Pacific time. So see you there. Bye.
Thank you for having us. And
Thank
thank you for
you.
watching.